Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome. We will get started in maybe another 30 seconds. Just let a few more people jump in. I can see more people joining us, which is fantastic. We've had a really great amount of interest in this presentation, so I'm excited for it, and it looks like you guys are too, which is really nice. So thank you for being here. So feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Hi, Mel. Hi, Tracy. Which animal welfare leg are you from, Tracy? Deb from Orange, welcome. Oh, yeah, we got private dog trainer, Jenny, fantastic. Kirsty, head of behaviour at RSPCA Queensland, welcome. Great to have you here. Beamley Shelter, AWLQ, yay. Andy from Pause Zone, welcome. Shelby, and our new Cairns Pound person, welcome. Awesome. All right, look, I think we might get started because there's a huge amount to get through. Okay, so welcome back to the G2Z online event series. Thank you so much for all being here. In the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to the elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. My name's Nell Thompson. I'm the coordinator of the National Getting to Zero program, or as we call it, G2Z. And I'll be hosting the webinar for you today, but don't blame any internet glitches or Zoom glitches on me. I'm just hanging on for the ride. Getting to Zero was developed by the Animal Welfare League of Queensland, and they continue to support it to this day. G2Z offers its consulting, support and educational services at no charge to local governments, not-for-profits and companion animal welfare organisations across Australia. Our focus continues to be on issues such as strategy, legislation, operations, programs and community engagement, working towards reducing intake to pounds and shelters and keeping pets in their homes. We invite people to take a look at the website g2z.org.au, sign up for our regular e-news, connect with us via social media, and to get in touch with us to see if we can help or have a chat about the issues that are facing you and your community or organisation. So to today's session, once I hand over to our presenter, there'll be around 50 minutes of presentation and around 10 minutes of question time once the presentation's concluded. The recording of this webinar will be accessible via our website to everyone to watch at any time. We're going to ask that everyone mutes themselves during the presentation unless our presenter indicates otherwise. And if you have questions, you can start putting them in the Q&A section and we'll get through as many as we can at the end of the session. If you have very quick questions that relate to your understanding of the content, put your hand up and we'll try and get to them during the presentation. As always, please excuse any working from home background noises that may filter through. I'm very happy to have Dr. Diana Rayment here with us today. Diana holds a PhD in Applied Canine Behaviour and a Bachelor of Animal Science. Her primary research area was canine behaviour and assessments in applied settings, like animal shelters, and the welfare of companion animals within the shelter system. She's also worked in a variety of academic and industry settings, including as a TAFE and university educator, as an applied scientist studying companion animal welfare and behaviour and working dog assessments, a dog trainer, a shelter nurse, and most recently leading the behaviour team at the Greyhound Adoption Program in Victoria. Diana is now working to integrate and improve animal welfare and animal management practices in Australia through a variety of roles, including as the shelter supervisor at Second Chance Animal Rescue in Victoria, Australia. Diana also runs her own business, providing practical, evidence-based training and consulting on companion animal behaviour, management and welfare to people and organisations in the animal management and welfare field. So over to you, Diana.
Thanks for the intro, Nell, and thank you to everybody for coming along today. It's been really great to have some support from everybody, from a bunch of people that I know who are here in the audience. As Nell said, please pop your hand up and feel free to interact during the presentation if there's something that you'd like some more information or some more clarification on. Otherwise, if you pop the question in the Q&A, I'll do my best to get through them at the end. So into today's preso. So the focus of today's presentation is really on building better behaviour assessment systems, and probably the main take-home message that I want everybody to kind of think about and really have a think about how you can make this work in the facility that you're in yourself, is how to move from that kind of model that we've traditionally used, where we've got a one-time or sometimes a couple of time one-point assessment of dog behaviour sociability, how they're handled and things like that, through to a more comprehensive assessment system. And so that really means that you need to develop an understanding of the context that you're assessing behaviour in. So what's it like for the dog in your facility, and also how you go about either creating pathways or gathering information that you can't necessarily gather in a normal kennel environment. So this boy that I've got up on the screen in front of you at the moment, he's up here because he's a bit of a poster child for some of the things that I'm going to be talking about today. He is he's no longer with us, so his outcome wasn't the one we'd all hoped for, but at the same time, there was a lot of really good stuff and a lot of really, really good people involved in his assessments. And so the pictures that you see there on the left, when he first came to us, he's actually a dog that we had here at SCAR, and he'd been in the system already for a couple of months at this stage. But his welfare at that point was really quite poor. He was suffering from very significant kennel stress to the point where he had basically full-time diarrhea, and he couldn't put on weight despite the fact that the people caring for him were doing their absolute best and really did care for him a lot. And that second picture is of him at a facility that we actually sent him up to so he can get some kind of specialist feedback for some people who were very experienced with his breed, and that's something we'll talk about a bit today too. So when we're talking about behaviour assessments, there's been a lot of research and particularly a lot of discussion around the difference between a test and an assessment over the last couple of years, and a very much so a big push towards dropping the use of the word test completely and just calling everything an assessment. And while I do definitely appreciate that I want everybody to start move towards that systemic model of assessing, I really want people to just not switch what they're calling what they're doing from a test to an assessment and still be doing all the same stuff. So when we're talking about how we assess behaviour, if we're talking about a test, think about it like, when you're back in high school and you had, your multiple choice question that you sat there and you used your pencil to fill out your little check boxes and they got sent through a computer, and it was one time, the test was basically a pass, a fail, a reset, and it was really, a kind of one context, one time thing. So that picture at the top that you can see, that's, our initial, what we call our kind of intake assessment or intake test at GAP, where we essentially brought the greyhounds in and we said, here's a small little dog, what do you want to do with it? That has definite value at gathering information, but that cannot possibly tell me all I need to know about a dog before I put it out into society as somebody's pet. And so what we want to move towards is a more holistic information gathering style when we're doing assessments. And that should include things like, you can see this picture at the bottom here. That's my Roddy, and he's in a playgroup yard with a bunch of greyhounds. He's standing next door to a pointer, and they're all in there, and we're beginning to learn what these dogs are like as a dog with other greyhounds. And so we want to be gathering information in a systematic way, recording it, using it, and letting the information that we gather about the animal really dictate what we do with it, what pathways we choose. So these things used to all be really commonplace, and fake arms and stuffed dogs and dolls are definitely still out and about and in use. And there is definitely a case to be made in some situations for the use of some of these items. So, when you're looking at research around something like a stuffed dog, it's really important to look at what the cohort of animals is that research is being done on, and what the specifics of the information that you're reading are. Because in terms of using something like a stuffed dog in a normal shelter assessment, pretty universally, all the information that's coming out is saying, not great. It really doesn't give us very good resolution for normal pet dogs. But if you go and you have a look at the information from, purpose-bred fighting dog busts, where, they might have 200 or 300 dogs who have come in and they've been selected very, very heavily for offensive aggression towards dogs. If you go get yourself a stuffed dog that's standing upright with its mouth closed and looks quite stiff, that particular presentation will actually provide you with some good information about those dogs. So, yes, there is definitely, some value to some of these tools, but it's very, very important when you're using them that you actually understand what the information is that you're collecting. So that little fake doll at the top, the little girl doll, the research around those shows us that they're pretty good for giving us a bit of an idea about how dogs react to something that's a bit weird going on in the environment. Very, very, very little relevance to how dogs act around kids. It's not a kid test. And so as much as we can, what we want to do is, from the purpose of for everybody who's actually doing these assessments in a normal kind of kennel environment, we want to make our information gathering and the context that we gather that information in as close as possible to the context that a pet dog will be living in. Take them out for a walk, take them out, and do some parallel walking with another dog. Sit in a space with them and just relax and see what they do. Give them some downtime and start collecting all this different information about them in all these different ways. That'll give you a better idea about who that dog is than taking out a fake hand and doing an old-fashioned food guarding test. Now, the next thing I want to the next main point is really about the resolution of the information that we're gathering. So, by and large, we've tended to, primarily because of resource limitations, really move towards, particularly when we're doing our assessments, a tick the box or a short sentence that tells us what's going on with that dog during that one-time assessment. So if I was describing the picture that I can see in front of me, it's not in great resolution, it's black, it's a black pencil drawing, and you can kind of sort of see the small dog's turning around and having a bit of a crack at a larger dog. And so that gives us, depending on how much you read into that, that gives us a little bit of information about the interaction between those two dogs. But it's very, very vague and it's missing a lot. Now, if I show you this picture, and so this might be a picture from somebody who has trained to observe closely and provide a lot of detail in the information that they're recording. So you can see now that there's a larger dog and he's kind of standing over the top of the smaller dog, and the smaller dog's turned around, and you can see that he's kind of having a little bit of a snap towards the larger dog's face. If you're a good observer, you can see that their body tensions are low. You can see that the little guy's, he's kind of got a little bit of retraction of his teeth. He's not really having a proper crack, but you can gather a lot more information about that. And when we're asking people to record information within our facilities, so whether that's animal care staff, veterinary staff, volunteers, finders, people who are surrendering their pets, what we're trying to get at is getting enough information from them that we can actually picture what's going on. So we want to know about the context, what's happening, and help me picture what that dog was actually doing at that time. Again, though, this is still information that's much better, but it's in one context. And so what we're really looking for is to get ourselves a little movie. And so you can see there, hopefully that video played okay. That's those same two dogs. So that's Cruz and Bowie. Bowie's the little fluffy one. And that was them playing with each other in between greyhound assessments. This is what they did all day, every day in between meeting greyhounds. And the entire time, yeah.
So sorry to interrupt. Do you want to just
You're
play
good.
that one more time? So it's playing glitchily, but
Yeah.
you can see what's going on. But let's play that one more time.
Yep, will do. You can see there I kept it a bit short, so hopefully it's not too short. But you can see that they literally play body face full on. And so, you know, while they're there, Chris is on the ground, he's rolling on his back, they're having a bit of body face. You can see it, there's teeth snapping and the little dogs, you know, he's having a bit of a crack, Bowie. But it's literally all good, healthy, relaxed play. And so you can see how from that first picture where we didn't have too much resolution, it was just a one-time picture where the little dog's turning around and having a bit of a snap, which might tell us that the little dog has an issue with big dogs, all the way through to looking at the video where they're actually playing with each other and you can say, yes, that is definitely a positive social interaction. And so what we want to do is get video quality information and we want to get it across multiple different contexts. That's really the aim when we're doing these assessments. I'm going to see if I can get it to go. Cool. Now, when you are looking at behaviour at any one point in time, so if you have a look at the green bubble at the bottom of the screen at the moment, which says observable behaviour, let's say you have a fantastic recording system where you have information from, you know, everybody that you can possibly get. It's information from your vets, information from your kennel staff, information from, you know, finders, from, you know, a relinquishing owner. Everybody who's, you know, giving you information about that dog is doing it in a really good way. You've got a fantastic system. If so, you're doing really, really well, because that's a really tough thing to do, to get that degree of consistency across a whole group of people and keep training up so that their skills don't slide. The behaviour that you're seeing, though, is observable behaviour, and that's affected by a bunch of different things that are going on in that dog's life at that time. So what we tend to do when we kind of have traditionally thought about these tests is said what we're doing is a temperament assessment. We're kind of looking at the dog and we're saying, are you a good dog or are you a bad dog? The problem being is that if you look at all of those blue bubbles, all of those things are affecting the behaviour that we're seeing at a point in time. So the ones that are closer to the bottom are short term. So we've got things like social context. Were there other dogs? Were there people? Was there somebody who was familiar to the dog that was with them at the time? Because that will change how likely they are to use aggression or feel fearful and, you know, be put into a position in which they feel like they need to use aggression. What's the environmental context? Is it hot? Is it cold? Is it noisy? And what's the physiological context? Oftentimes within a shelter environment, we're dealing with dogs, particularly in Victoria. I'm going to use Victoria as the example because this is, you know, what I'm most familiar with. We have an 8-day hold, and our code of practice cages pretty small. So you've got a single compartment cage. It's 1.2 or 1.4 wide, a couple of meters deep, and oftentimes what happens is the dogs will come in and they'll be in that cage for 8 days solid during their mandatory hold, and then they'll have their assessment done. Now, within that 8 days, the level of stress that dog is experiencing just from confinement and from being in a shelter environment means that by the time you get to do your assessment, all of their stress response systems have ramped right up, and you're dealing with a dog who is probably not sleeping properly, is probably, you know, amped up to the point where they're going to be reacting just on a physiological level. How quickly their body is ready to do something is significantly higher than it would be if you'd assessed, say, at day 2, or if you took that dog straight out of a pet home and did the exact same assessments on them. And so it's really important to think about what's going on for the dog at that point in time and what the information that you're gathering actually means. Because it's not just temperament, it's not just what the dog was born with, and it's not just personality, you know, what it's born with and all the other things that have affected its behaviour up to that point, or its prior learning. It's everything all together that you're actually looking at. And so what you're trying to do is observe the dog in a bunch of different contexts so you can tease those things apart. Now, this is a really good case. I bring up Lucky on the regular because he's a perfect example of a dog who, welfare affected his behaviour so much that he actually was at the point of basically being put to sleep the first time I met him. So if you look at the picture on your far left, you'll see, if you look really closely, you'll probably be able to see his bottom canine just about to make contact with the fake arm. And when I met Lucky the first time, I think that I saw this video. This is actually a still from a video, and I saw that and went, I'm not really rapt about what he's doing. I mean, it's not fantastic what he's doing, but he's literally doing a lot of snapping with absolutely no pressure behind his teeth. How often had that dog actually been assessed? And it turned out that was his 6th or 7th food test. The first couple of times he did quite well, and then his behaviour started to deteriorate in the kennels. And what happened is that he started to show some aggression around food and some resource guarding, and so he was retested because the staff weren't confident with him. And then, of course, he reacted badly, and everything snowballed from there. And so what ended up happening is that any time anywhere near the front of Lucky's kennel, while he was eating, he was already ramped up, ready to go and say, "Oi, get as far away from me as you can. I'm not feeling great. Leave my food alone. It's the only good thing in my day." Now, the great thing with Lucky and the great thing about the people that I was working with at the time is that they let me take him and do some work with him. And after about a week of work in the kennels, we actually sent him out to one of our very good foster carers who also happened to be a staff member, and said, "You know what, just let the dog sleep. Take him home, give him his own space, let him sleep for like 2 whole days, and then just feed him in his own space. Let's see what happens." And that middle picture is Lucky on his second day at home. In the backyard, he slept really, really, like a log. We subsequently found out that Lucky actually sleeps a large portion of his day. His most favourite spot is in the middle of the backyard in whatever sun he can find. And his resource guarding went away completely on its own. So Michelle never saw resource guarding in her house. She has grandkids, and so we were very, very particular about when the grandkids were coming over, but it got to the point where her, I think she might have been at the time maybe 6 or 7, ended up doing a bunch of training with Lucky, food-based training, because he was actually so good outside of the kennel environment that he was rock solid. And so it's really important. He's a fantastic demonstration of how much welfare can affect behaviour in a negative way. And that picture of him on the right is literally the day that he went home to adoption, and we followed up with him for a long period of time. I think the last follow-up was about a year out from his adoption, and they had never seen resource guarding. I can't hammer home to everybody how important it is. I think my internet connection might be a bit unstable. Hammer home to everybody how important it is that you address your in-kennel welfare, and make sure that as much as you humanly can, you make sure that the welfare of the animals in your facility is kept as high as it possibly can, and you be mindful of how long you're keeping them there for, because these things will negatively affect their behaviour, and that will negatively affect your ability to gather good information about the animal. So what does best practice actually look like in action, and what are all these components of a really good assessment system? All of these dogs that you can see up on the screen are all out. One of them actually belongs to Now. His name's Diesel. It's really about, like I said, gathering as much information as you can and making sure that you are setting the dog up to succeed as much as possible. In every interaction, we should be aiming to have that dog be better at the other side of it, not worse. So if you're going to go, you think, "Oh, I don't really trust you. I'm going to pull out a fake hand and I am actually going to use this to see what you'll do around food." What you should be doing is doing some counter conditioning around that whole thing, so that at the end of it, even if you're looking at the dog and that dog is saying, "You need to stay away from my food or I'm going to nail you," the end result is not that you're making the dog worse, it's that you're making the dog better. Take the time to do 5 or 10 reps of just chucking some chicken at the dog when you go past it, so that you're not adding to the considerable stress that they're already feeling. So, in case this doesn't come through clearly yet, welfare conscious housing is absolutely the kind of core of any good assessment system. The information there on the left, that little paragraph, is straight out of the Association for Sheltered Veterinarians Guidelines for Humane Care. And they are welfare-minded guidelines that are actually evidence-based for short-term care of dogs and cats in shelter environments. And I popped this particular little sentence up because it is so super important. And this is something that we're seeing a trend towards in Australia, and to some degree we're kind of following the States a little bit. But long-term confinement of any animal, including feral or aggressive animals who cannot be provided with basic care, daily enrichment and exercise without inducing stress, is unacceptable. That's one of about 20 things that those guidelines absolutely say you cannot do under any circumstance at all. We don't keep dogs and cats locked in boxes when we can't provide good, basic, humane care conditions for them because we don't know what to do or because we think the environment is causing the issue. If it is, do something about it. And if you can't do something about it, then you've got to start making some hard decisions. So if you have a look at the two little guys there on the right, there are a couple of little poms that we had come in from a situation. It was a group intake with quite a large number of dogs, and you can just see on the left-hand side the reflection with their double-sided housing. So they've got their beds and their food and their water on one side, and they're sitting there and actually looking quite happy given how stressed they were. And straight through the other side of that little door, you can see a completely empty kennel, and that's their toilet space. One thing that we do have here a lot and is very, very common is we have code of practice cages, particularly in Victoria, but they're super common throughout Australia. We've got a single compartment, we've got a bed and maybe some toys at the back, food and water bowls at the front, and not very much space in between for the dogs to go to the toilet. Now, the problem with that is that you're essentially forcing an animal to go to the toilet in its own kitchen or in its own bedroom. And so much the same as dogs and cats. So with cats, ideally we want a double compartment housing, or we want enough physical space between those areas with different functions so that the animal is not stressed by actually having to toilet, near their bed or near their food. It's exactly the same thing with dogs. And to us in Australia, that seems like it's, like this huge high standard of care, because we're basically, in order to create that in a lot of our existing facilities, you'd need to halve your capacity. There are other ways that you can go about, giving those dogs the opportunity to actually have a good quality of life. But it's really important to understand that when we're talking about research on, the day 1 to 3 where animals are settling into a kennel environment, and day, 10 to 14 where we're starting to see signs of confinement stress, that's in this type of housing that research is done. That's not in the type of housing that we have here most commonly in Australia. And so that welfare conscious housing, or having, an army of volunteers who can come and get our dogs out multiple times a day so they can go to the toilet away from their bed. They can have visual barriers on the front of their pen so that they're not being exposed constantly to everything that's walking past. Again, this is the core of a really good assessment system, and it's also the core of just having good welfare in your facility. Now, enrichment. In kennel enrichment is the basics that I would want to see in absolutely any facility at all. So that can be including, food, toys, chew, and sometimes it's for very good reasons. If you've got a particular group of dogs who are prone to a particular issue, you might make sure that you tailor your in-kennel enrichment to a particular type. But in-kennel enrichment in and of itself is the bare minimum. What we need to be doing is thinking about dogs in our care the same way we'd be thinking about pet dogs. So when I'm dealing with a private owner and they have a single dog that lives at home and they go out and they, work full time and they come home, I'm like, your dog needs a bare minimum of 2 hours a day of good, positive social interaction. That could be sitting watching TV. It could be going for a walk. It could be sitting there and chewing on a pig's ear next to you. But we're talking a bare minimum of 2 hours. That's for a dog who's pretty okay with its own company. Now, if we're locking all these dogs in boxes next to each other, that's not positive social interactions. This is literally being locked in a box next to a bunch of other really, really stressed out animals. So what we need to do is actually physically get them out of that space, and then we need to be interacting with them positively as people, and as much as we can facilitating good, positive interactions between each other. So whether that's parallel walking, if that's what you can facilitate, if you can do small play groups, and give the dogs an actual chance, the dogs who want to, a chance to go out and actually run around and play together, run off some steam, like Wally up there in the top right-hand corner, setting up a crate in your office, you know what I mean? And just literally having them sit there. So it's like us, sitting there watching TV and the dogs are sitting there next to us and they're just getting a break from the kennel environment. If you walk into your kennels and you're so used to the sound of your kennels that you walk in and that noise is just part of the background noise, one, I need you to reset. I need you to take somebody into your kennels that is not used to being in that environment and say to them, how do you feel in here? So they can actually help you to understand how stressful it is. And I also need to really, really hammer home to you that you get to leave. The dogs don't. They're stuck in there. So if at 2 o'clock in the morning you've still got dogs barking, they're still there and they're still listening to that. So being able to give them an opportunity to just get out of that environment and sit and chill and relax and let down is extremely important. And that's just part of normal enrichment and daily care. Foster. Foster is hugely important. And I know that, again, this is going to seem like one of those things where, particularly if you're in a kind of pound or, a kind of council-run facility or in a facility that doesn't have a huge amount of resources, foster care is one of those things that will actually help you so much more than worrying about kennel design. So if you have those, single compartment code of practice cages, get yourself some things to hang on the front of the door and get yourself in kennel enrichment, do all of those things. But, if you have to focus on, curtailments and enrichment, or focus on developing a foster care system so that you can actually get dogs physically out of that environment, focus on foster, because that is the thing that's going to give dogs, are dogs who did terribly in shelters for one reason or another, but did much better in foster. The middle one is Lucky, that greyhound that I spoke about earlier, and that was literally the first day he found his Zoomy button. He went out and he did like big super circles in Michelle's back garden and he was running around like a crazy thing. And he was just so happy. And that was the first time anybody in a matter of months had seen that dog happy. And that was purely just by getting him out of the kennel environment and letting him sleep and relax and not be surrounded by noise and a million other stressed dogs. Same deal with Maisie. She turns out she really, really loves watching TV. And little girl Milan, she struggled a bit in life in general, but life in the kennels was definitely much harder for her than life everywhere else. Now, behaviour competent staff. So we've got, a basic care down pat, and we know that we can actually keep our animals as much as we can behaviourally healthy. How do we actually start gathering that information that we need? And the first thing we need to do is make sure everybody's on the same wavelength. So train. Develop systems where you actually are gathering information from all of your different staff, but make sure you don't just go, hey, everybody, can you please fill out these pieces of paper so I can get information from you? Because that's not necessarily going to be very useful for you if you're coming along and you're looking to assess a dog. What you need to do is actually get everybody together. There are some really awesome free resources available. So ASPCA Pro, up there on the right-hand side, they've got a canine communication series, which is free. It's 4-part, and I think there's actually 3 of the older webinars that were put together by Trish back in the day up there still. The Fear-Free Shelters program, also free for anybody who's working or volunteering in a shelter environment. So for your Yin's low stress handling DVDs, you can actually buy the pack. It's a couple of $100 to buy them, but each of those DVDs has learning labs on it. So the best way that you can actually get your staff onto the same wavelength is to run the training, but then rehash it regularly. So we're talking every 6 or 12 months, get everybody together, particularly if you've got, a decent staff turnover like many of us in welfare do, and make sure you're doing that training on a regular basis. Get everybody together, feed them, pull a couple of staff dogs in. That's Reggie, he's one of my guys, and just get them practicing, walking back and forth. How do you, use leash? How do you handle leashes well? How do you read a dog well? Let's show a bunch of videos and actually, compare notes so we can make sure everybody's being consistent and we're all recording the same thing. Because when I, as a behaviour person, come along and I read those notes, I want to be able to picture the movie. And if I can't picture the movie, then I have to go find the person and try and get that information from them. The system's not working as well as it should be. And of course, down here in the bottom, you can't see the logo very well, but that's Trish's Tricia's IFIC website and the Shelter Behaviour Mentorship on there, which I know a couple of people who are here today are currently doing, is fantastic. And by all means, please feel free to invest in that for some of your staff. It is very much so worthwhile. Now, when we're gathering multiple, talking about is tailoring what we're trying to get from people so that we can get the best, most accurate information from them based on their interactions with the dog. So if you want to find out about a dog's personality, what makes them tick, what makes them happy, do they really love a particular type of food, stuff that you might pop in their bio, let's go talk to our kennel staff and the volunteers who are interacting with that dog the most. So we don't just want information from them about, whether the dog's barking at other dogs when they're walking past or anything like that. They spend the most time with those dogs. They're going to know that they've got a quirky little, they pull a funny, goofy face when they're happy, you scratch a certain part of their body. Those are the things that are going to help us really help somebody else connect with the dog and get them out the door into a home. Finders, so people who are bringing animals in, they've actually often done a lot.
Sorry to interrupt.
Animal by the time they get to us, even if they've just caught the dog on the street, put it in a car and then brought it to the facility, that's actually still quite a lot. So anybody who's done this regularly for a living large, yeah.
Sorry, can you just back up? We lost you from about finders there. Can I just get you to go over that again?
Yes, definitely. So when we're talking to finders, it's really, I suppose, worth bearing in mind that they've actually done quite a lot with the animal that they've actually brought in. So even if they've caught them off the street, they've just found them in a local park, they've contained them, they've put a lead on them, they've put them in the back of the car, they've driven them somewhere, and so they know how that dog's going to react inside a car when it's driving through traffic or seeing particular things outside of the car. And then they've actually physically brought them to the facility. And all of those bits of information are really super valuable. So when somebody comes in to drop off an animal to you, even if they're not a relinquishing owner, have some way to actually collect that information from them, particularly using prompting questions. So, not just where did you find the dog, what's he like as a dog, did you bring him here by car, did you see any other dogs, how did he respond to people who were unfamiliar, or did you notice a difference in the way he responded to different people? And prompt the person, okay, what are the different things that I've actually done with this dog prior to actually arriving at your front door? With relinquishing owners, this is always a bit of a tricky topic because there's some really good kind of research on using structured questionnaires to gather information. And there's also some really good research on actually just sitting down and having a conversation with people. And so for us here at SCAR, and I tend to default to the conversation-based approach, my aim in every situation when I'm talking to a relinquishing owner is to find out if we can actually help them keep their dog. And the only way that you can do that is by having a conversation with them to say, what's going on, tell me as much as you can, and actually work through that process with them to find out what's really going on in a situation. But you also need to make sure that you don't just get stuck on that narrow little path of, what's actually gone wrong in that particular relationship. So you want to make sure you get a breadth of information as well. So sometimes it can be worthwhile having both. There's a shortened version of the CBART questionnaire that you can use. As a general rule, people will be the most honest with you if you are honest with them and you actually connect with them and have a conversation. It's much easier to just kind of tick boxes and kind of leave out information when you're kind of just ticking a piece of paper and handing it over and hoping for the best, then when you're actually sitting there having a conversation with somebody either over the phone or in person when the dog's right in front of you, you know what I mean? So try your very best to have those conversations with relinquishing owners to gather information that will help you and help the dog, and also seeing if you can actually keep the dog where it is, because stopping it coming into the shelter in the first place is the best outcome for everybody, as long as we can make it safe for all involved. Your vet staff, every single vet check or vet interaction should hopefully have some behaviour information on it to let you know how that animal goes while it's being handled. Behaviour staff, so it could be that your behaviour staff are specifically doing training with your animal. It could be they're the ones doing the dog sociability assessments, you know, going out on walks or running play groups. All those notes need to be on the system, and also your foster carers. So making sure you've got a really good way for your foster carers to give you information. Again, make sure you're not just limiting it to what's potentially going wrong with this dog, but also get that information about the dog's personality. Now, this is another one of my bugbears. So we don't automatically expect that our animal care staff, even if they're very, very competent, we don't expect them to do complex vet care. We don't expect that somebody who, you know, maybe has got a certificate or even a degree, you know, in something related to animal care will be able to do a surgery. And we understand and we inherently accept that there are things that are going to need to be done with that animal that need to be done by somebody with specialist training. You shouldn't be expecting your animal care staff or somebody who is not appropriately trained to do complex behaviour work either. There is a reason why we have high-level training in behaviour work, and there is a reason why, particularly in an environment like a shelter, where it's not just somebody who knows how to do basic training or somebody who's run some dog training classes, it's somebody who actually understands, you know, basic stress physiology, somebody who understands the context that you're working in, somebody who can actually have enough of, who has enough experience placing dogs into homes and working through behaviour problems with dogs in homes, that they know what your adopter population is actually going to honestly be able to handle, and how to integrate those dogs into homes if you are placing dogs who have high needs. So not every facility is going to be able to have behaviour people on staff, but you also need to understand that if you don't have, you know, competent behaviour staff, or you aren't able to consult with them or get their opinions on particular animals or situations, that's going to limit what you can do. And if that's the way it is, then that's the way it is. But what we don't want to see is people, you know, either holding on to animals for extended periods of time to try and, you know, get a good outcome, even though, you know, just being there is actually damaging that animal. Or going, you know, there's a lot of pressure on us to put these animals back out into society. Oh, we're not really 100% sure, but we don't feel great about it. You know what? Let's give it a crack anyway. Let's just put the animal back out. No, no, we don't do that, because this is how we get people bitten. They really kind of start driving a wedge between, you know, the welfare sector to a large degree and the animal management sector, because oftentimes they're the ones who are dealing with the consequences of what we do, and also to some degree trainers in our area. And we're also traumatising people. So if you can't, don't. But as much as you can, actually engage people with, you know, high-level training in behaviour to be helping you with some of those tougher decisions, particularly around adoptability criteria, which we'll talk about in a sec. Now, building bridges. So ideally, what we want to do is make sure that, you know, if you can think about all the different pathways an animal could take out of your facility, there is no facility that will actually be able to process all of the animals and get them out into all different pathways in an efficient manner, and make sure all of those animals have the best possible outcome they can do. In order to do that, the amount of resources you would have would just be phenomenal. We're not islands. We don't need to be islands. What we need to be doing is actually building relationships with other organisations who have strengths in different areas to us. So if you have a look at that picture there from the Pet Rescue Directory, 922 groups located on it. I'm pretty sure that's just in that map view. You know, you obviously want to think about what groups, you know, what are groups processes and procedures are, and make sure that they're consistent with yours, and that you have a really good, clear idea and good criteria about the groups that you'll work with to make sure that everybody's comfortable with each other. But also, don't be like, you know what, we're just going to try and do this all on our own and you know, hope for the best, or we're not going to actually build those relationships, because that's not the way to get the best for the animals, and it's not the way to get the best for your own staff. You're putting an enormous amount of pressure on your own team that just doesn't need to be there, because we can actually help each other if we kind of go for it right. And the reason why I've got Horsham Paws up on there and Horsham Rural City Council up there is because they were, honestly, back in the day, so almost 10 years ago to the day was the first time I met some of the team from Horsham Paws and Wayne, the AMO from back at the council there. And they had an amazing relationship. It was the first time that I'd looked at it and gone, you know, you've got your local big rescue group and your AMO, and you guys are just genuinely working together in a fantastic way. And it was hugely refreshing to see, but it was also really surprising for them because I was like, wow, this is great. Like, how did you guys make this happen? And they were like, what are you talking about? We just, you know, we sat down, we talked. This is what we made happen. Everybody's pushing in the same direction. But that's not the way it happens everywhere. And as far as I know, they're still going grey guards. So it definitely is possible. It's definitely something that we should be working towards. And if we want to build good rapport with people, this is how we do it. You know what I mean? Get the community involved, because that's how you start racking up those really positive interactions with them, and you start helping them feel better about animal management systems, rather than feeling like it's all enforcement and it's all compliance. It's like, no, there's actually so much to this, and there's a lot of positives to it as well. Now, a bit of a note on niche breeds. Very few niche breeds or dogs who are bred for a particular purpose are going to do well in a shelter. That doesn't necessarily mean that they shouldn't be placed, but what it does mean is that we need to be mindful of the fact that our adopter populations are primarily pet people, and what we're aiming to do, the criteria that we're aiming to set is, can this dog have a good relationship and be a good, safe, you know, positive member of the community in a typical pet home? And the answer for some of these breeds is no. No, they're not. Like, if you go and you take yourself a purpose-bred Malinois, it is not going to go into a pet home. And that doesn't mean it's a broken Malinois, it means it's a Malinois. And so what we need to do is make sure that we're not, A, trying to be experts in every breed, because you're just not going to be. But B, what we want to do is actually build relationships with people who are experts in their breed, so that we can say, hey, we've got this dog, you know, this is what's going on with it. Can you come and let me know what you think? Or can you take it? You know what I mean? Is this a dog that you're actually interested in taking and placing yourself? Because they're the ones who are actually specialists in their specialist breeds. And it's always been a bit of a thing with me, particularly with livestock guardian dogs, because they tend to do so poorly in a shelter environment, and it's not a good reflection. Like, you look a livestock guardian in a box, and it's going to react poorly, because that's what they do. And it's always been, you know, I think in the back of my brain whenever I'm dealing with those particular animals, but it was really rammed home to me when I was working with the greyhounds, because, you know, the amount of times that I went out to facilities or assessed a dog that, you know, this exact situation happened, where I went out and I'm like, bring me your best dog list. Let's start with the really good ones. And I literally took a dog that was in the adoption kennels and went, here you go, here's a little fluffy dog, and she didn't do anything. And the moment I unclipped that lead, she took off like a cheetah, and she nailed that little dog as hard as she possibly could. And that was a dog that was about to go back out into society as a pet. And so what we need to do is make sure that when we do have purpose-bred dogs, that we're going to the people who are specialists in those dogs for information on what we should be doing with them, and we're trusting their opinions, building those relationships, and actually developing pathways for dogs who might not otherwise make it out of the system, or getting an actual opinion from somebody who knows a breed to say, no, this dog actually genuinely is not a good, safe dog to put out, even within that specialist environment. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes you can get the best people involved, and the answer is still, I'm really sorry, this dog's not safe to place. Now, defining adoptability. So, you know, we say defining adoptability, but really the other half of that coin is working out what dogs we can't place. And that is going to vary in every single facility based on your human resources, based on the setup of your actual facility itself. Do you have a foster care program? what's your on-site dog walking program like? How much ability do you have to actually do behaviour mod with dogs? Can you keep them behaviourally healthy and do the behaviour modification and actually transition them into a home? Or are you actually a small facility where you might have 10 kennels and the main aim of the game is to basically pull them in and go, you guys are really super easy dogs, get them straight out to adoption and try and funnel everything else through rescue partners or partners who actually have the ability to kind of do the extra work or do that extra assessment with those dogs. So when we're defining adoptability, it's going to look different in every single facility that we go to. The general process should always be the same. A dog who nails somebody down to the bone with little provocation shouldn't be making it out of any facility, ever. We shouldn't be in the business of putting dogs back out who are going to hurt people and who are going to potentially ruin somebody's life. At the same time, there's a lot of dogs in the middle, and a lot of those dogs sometimes can be helped a lot just by letting them go home and sleep in the backyard. And some of those dogs can't really be helped by letting them go home and sleep in a backyard. And the way you know the difference is to make sure you've got somebody who can ask the right questions and actually get the right information and build that system around that dog to find a pathway for it. Not everybody has that. That said, everybody needs to have some type of written criteria that we use to make decisions about dogs. We don't make that decision with a dog in front of us because it's really, really difficult to have the discussion when you've got a lovely dog sitting in front of you with leukodama eyes and you're going, do I put you to sleep? You know what I mean? Is this the end of your pathway out of here? What you do is you sit back and you say, what have we got? And we sit down and we have a discussion as a team, work out what we can actually do, and then we use that as our guidelines for how we're actually dealing with dogs, and we change it. So we revise it and we revise it and we revise it based on what resources we've got at the time, based on maybe we've got a new staff member who's really awesome at behaviour mod, so we can actually stretch out a little bit. Maybe we've moved into a new facility and so our baseline level of welfare is much better. Maybe we can do a bit more. Maybe we've actually just had cutbacks and so we've lost a bunch of staff, or we no longer have a rescue partner who can actually deal with a certain group of dogs, and so we can't deal with them anymore. You have to keep reviewing it. It has to be a live document. And ideally what we want to do is every time we get a tricky case where we're like, okay, this is a little bit hard for us to make a decision on, go back and use that as a stimulus to actually review your processes and say, okay, why was this particular thing tricky? Post-adoption follow-up. We're almost there at the end. So this is really a big one for me because this is the way that you gather information about whether or not your assessments are actually accurate. So when we turn around and say, okay, we're pretty sure that this particular animal was displaying this behaviour due to kennel stress, hopefully what we're going to do is send it out to fostering. Just our theory, but if we can't, replace it in an adoptive home, and then you actually follow up with people. The adoption shouldn't be the end of the road. It should be the start. It should be the start of the relationship with that person, so you can actually follow that animal through, help them settle in, help them stay, build that relationship so they actually become, a solid, not a temporary kind of visitor to the home, but an actual part of the family. And again, you should be using that information that you get from your post-adoption follow-ups to review your processes. And this is something that you can, if you set it up well, you can get your volleys to help with, and you can actually start, roping in previous adopters and other people to actually help you build a little community around your adopters to start gathering that information. It's definitely it's not as tricky and as tough as it can sometimes seem to actually do that post-adoption follow-up, even with very little resources. So putting that whole thing together, there's a bit of a trajectory. So if you are, working at, a small council run facility where you've only got 5 or 10 kennels, and you don't currently have a huge amount of kind of partners in it all, maybe there's a lot going on for you guys, and so you don't have the amount of resources that you really need, and it's like, where the hell do I start? Start at the bottom, get your housing sorted, get your management sorted, start building those processes around that behavioural health of your population, and start working out systems to gather information. That straight away will actually help give you clarity around what you can actually kind of do. And instead of seeming like an impossible task, I promise you, because I've helped people and this has happened over and over again, once you actually start getting the information, the picture becomes clearer just of itself. And then once you've got better information, you can start creating those partnerships and those pathways for animals, because you can give your your other organisational partners really good information. And when you can do that, you can start to learn to trust that the conversation will be open and honest, then that in and of itself kind of snowballs and helps you build those relationships. Again, main adoptability criteria that are community minded. It's no good focusing only on getting animals out if we don't make sure that those are actually successful placements. And we need processes for reviewing our systems. And that little girl down there in the bottom corner is one of our big success stories where we actually kind of somehow managed to make all of these things come together for her in a situation where we wouldn't necessarily have been able to, and it was looking a bit sketchy for a while there. But sometimes you can make really, really good things happen if you get a bunch of people together and you just reach out and help. She was not headed for anywhere good until the manager of the facility that she was in reached out and said, "Hey, I don't know what to do. What can we do?" And now she's in a home. So thanks for coming along. It looks like there's a bunch of questions. So I will hand back to Nell, and hopefully Nell, you can make sure we get our questions answered.
Yes. Sorry, I'm here. My earphones died. Okay, let's go to the questions. We've got a bunch of questions, which is fantastic. So thanks everybody for popping those in. Question from Kat: do you encourage all these aspects of enrichment to be integrated on arrival at the point of intake?
As a general rule, yes. For me, enrichment is really just part of the daily care for an animal. And so you might not, get an animal out on the day that it arrives and then, take it for a street walk. But what you do want to do is make sure that you're actually meeting their needs. And so whenever I'm thinking about enrichment, I'm thinking of it as a system of looking at the dog and going, what do you need right now? You need sleep. All right, cool. Let's skip the in-kennel enrichment. We'll actually go and try and set up a system where you can sleep better. Then we set you up in a crate upstairs. And that happens the moment they walk through the door. Yeah.
Okay, great. Question from Felicity: could you please repeat at how many days do you see impacts of confinement stress?
Cool. So those numbers that I was quoting were from some research done by a guy called Michael Hennessy, which is a little bit older now. But basically what they showed was that animals who were kind of surrendered or entered into the system took between 2 and 3 days to really kind of come off that initial, high stress event of actually being entered into the system. And then between day 10 and day 14, you've really started to see the long-term effects of confinement stress kicking in. Bearing in mind that the shelters that he was doing his research in had some pretty good internal systems. So I would actually expect, one, that kind of trajectory not to go as low, like the baseline not to go as low in most facilities that I walk into, and also the confinement stress to start ramping up a lot quicker.
Yep, okay, that's great, thank you. Another question from Kat: do you combine the written data with short video snapshots? I ask because for my intake forms for private clients, the videos of a day in the life of Fossey are invaluable.
We kind of do informally. So here at SCAR, if you have the capacity to do it, I definitely think you should. It will definitely depend on the shelter management software that you're using. But essentially, the way we work is we take notes, we get notes onto the system, and if there's situations where we are not 100% clear on kind of what's going on, or we actually want more information about that, we'll either go out ourselves or we'll get video from people. And so I think if you can integrate it, it's excellent. It's just that making sure that the actual system that you're working on can hold those videos so that everybody can go back and look at them is probably the trickier part.
That's it. Okay, question from Adele: do you actually go out and check the rescue group before engaging their services? Or would you recommend it?
Yeah. So I think there's two parts to that. One is make sure that you've got a really good idea of what your criteria for your rescue groups are in terms of their record keeping, their own internal processes, their adoptability criteria, all of those things before you even have the conversation. And B, treat it like the beginning of a relationship, because that's what it is. So yes, definitely make the time to go and meet. Most rescue groups are rescue based, are foster based, so you're not really going to be able to go to a particular facility unless you plan on going and visiting all of their foster carers' houses. So it's really a case of building that relationship with them. If they do have a facility, definitely go see it. But I think it's more a case of when you're having a conversation, actually ask them those key questions. Do you have adoptability criteria? What are they? What are your thoughts around, placing animals? In foster homes, do you have guidelines around kind of reviewing if you've got an animal who you think might not be placeable? How do you go about dealing with that? And let them tell you, because that will give you an enormous amount of information about the group.
Fantastic, thank you. Question from Tina. Do you have a list of trusted breed-specific rescues in Australia?
We have our own internal list, yes. That obviously changes. So some of the rescue groups that I worked with a lot back in the day when I first started in 2004, nowadays I probably wouldn't necessarily work with them, just because things change and kind of trends in how organisations work change. And then there's the opposite as well. So not one that we publish, because everybody's, I suppose, criteria around groups that they will work with will vary. But yeah, we definitely do have our own internal list. And Tina, I'd be happy to talk to you about that because we know each other outside of this. So,
all right. Anonymous attendee, on what day of the dog arriving in kennels should a playgroup session be held? Is it recommended for every dog? We have very busy kennels and would like the dog out to adoption as soon as possible. So ideally, usually by day 2, after 2 behavioural assessments. The dog is desexed and then recovers from surgery, then straight out for adoption if straightforward dog ? I'm not sure if I've read that correctly.
Yeah. So I think this is one of those situations where, for me, the answer may vary depending on the dog. So if I've got a really straightforward dog who, when we meet it the first time, it is actively sociable with other dogs, so it's displaying a lot of pro-social behaviour towards dogs, towards people, you might put that dog in a playgroup within 24 hours of arriving, and let it play with another couple of dogs. And it'll be in and out really quite quickly because it's a straightforward dog. If I've got a dog who arrives and it's obviously behaviourally suppressed, it's not showing any bad behaviour, but it's not showing any good behaviour, I'd actually want to know a little bit more about that dog before throwing it in a playgroup and adding to its stress levels. Or, making the good dog who can help it. So I think at a minimum, you'd want to know the dog for a good, day or two to really have a bit of information about it before you did it. But at the same time, we're a managed intake facility, and so we do dog assessments before the dog's even actually technically in our system. And depending on how that goes, if it goes really super well, we may even let the dog have a bit of a play at that point in time. So it really depends on the dog. But what I would say is I'd want people who are very proficient with reading dog social behaviour doing those assessments. And to me, that would be more important than the timing, probably.
Okay. Question from Lisa. With the dogs that are fostered from a kennel environment, how do the dogs go if they need to go back to kennels, if it's a short-term foster arrangement, or is this not recommended?
We actually find that most of ours do okay. There is, there are definitely some dogs who don't cope so well when they do come back, you know what I mean? But generally what we find is if they've been here a few days, they go out to foster and then they come back for a day or two. Sometimes we do that because the foster carer can't make it back with the dog on the day of the adoption. They tend to do okay. They're coming back to an environment that they know it's not necessarily a groundbreaking, fantastic environment, but at the same time, we've worked really hard to make sure our animals on site have good welfare. So they get multiple walks a day. Our kennels are generally pretty quiet. there's a bunch going on with them, so it's not, they don't draw a bundle at the moment they walk back in the door, but I think the answer to that would probably change depending on the facility and who the dog is.
Yeah, okay. Question from Tamara. The involvement of foster carers is best for the dogs. Any thoughts on managing the foster carer's emotional health when a dog goes into foster and the outcome is not positive?
Yep. So for us, I suppose it's a bit of a multi-pronged thing. We make sure that we're not giving foster carers dogs they're not equipped to deal with. And we also make sure as much as possible, if we do have a tricky dog, that we've got a pretty good idea of what to do with that dog when it goes out to foster before it goes. And then at the actual time, there's conversations that need to happen. You know what I mean? This is just one of those things where making sure that you have an excellent foster coordinator or foster contact, making sure that you're quite open and transparent as much as is possible with your entire community around what you will actually place and when you won't place an animal, why, so that they understand why it's happening. And accepting that sometimes people are going to be upset with you. You know what I mean? It is okay for foster care at the time feels angry at me, because the long and the short of it is that, this is an animal that they've had in their home and they've loved it. And for one reason or another, it's not placeable. And if at that point in time their emotional reaction is frustration or their grief comes out as anger, well, it does. And we'll still support them through that. I'm not going to take that as a reflection on who they are. So there's two sides. I suppose there's multiple sides to it. Make sure you've got good relationships with your foster carers first. Make sure you actually train them really well and you're giving them dogs that are within their capabilities. And if it does come down to it, and we've had it, we have it happen, we make euthanasia decisions when we need to, then support them through it. Because just like us, it's not always an easy thing to do. So you've got to make sure that you've actually got a relationship there that you can leverage off to help them through it. And that transparency helps.
Yeah, if I can just quickly add something to that too, Di, it's just that communication part of that whole thing. So being in regular communication with the foster carers, so they're feeding information back to you, you're feeding information back to them about that, what that might mean long term, so that these, I mean, sometimes these things are going to be a shock. It's going to be out of left field. No one's going to have seen it coming. But if people are sort of aware from the get-go that this might be on the cards, and that, are they up for the, the challenge, if you like, then if they're already sort of having thoughts like that and aware of the processes and are comfortable and trust the processes of the organisation, then all of that makes things easier, whether they're volunteer, staff member, foster carer, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, we've got a question here from Karen. How do you do your dog-to-dog assessments? We are unable to let the dogs loose together or walk them off the facility.
So that's going to be tricky. So I suppose you need a safe space for us. I do some assessments through barriers. We do walk them off the facility. If you don't have anywhere to walk on your facility, to be honest, I'd be looking at troubleshooting how to get them out, even if it's a case of, multiple people putting them in cars and actually physically taking them somewhere else. So for us, we actually have a yard, like a small yard here. It's a particularly big yard. Up at Gap, we had the luxury of resources and space. We actually built a couple of very big playgroup yards with, double gates and a bunch of stuff in, and they were fantastic. But essentially, it's depending on the presentation of the dog, parallel walk and some breeds. If they're super easy dogs and they look like, oh, yeah, cool, we're actually going to be able to breed on lead because they've got a good skill set, we might do a breed on lead. But that's with a dog that we're fairly sure is going to be okay anyway. But if you think of it how you would, for me, what I usually say to people is think of it how you would advise people to introduce a new dog to their dog at home if they were adopting. So, you wouldn't say to them, take them home and just show them face to face on a lead, hope for the best. That's a terrible way to do things. So you want to set them up for success as much as you can. And it sounds like it's tricky in your environment, because if you don't have anywhere other than channels, then it's going to be near and impossible to actually set that up. So I'd try and work out how you can actually create an opportunity that you can actually, probably not wildly helpful.
No, it's a difficult situation that you're in. All right, guys, we've gone about 11 minutes over time. So I know that Di's got to get on with her day job, and I'm sure the rest of you do as well. There are a few questions left in to answer, but if you want to email Diana, all her contact details are on the screen for you now. Di, we've had some requests for the presentation itself, if you wouldn't mind PDFing that, and then I can pop that up with the recording. I think everyone's really enjoyed it. There's been fantastic feedback in the chat. Really appreciate you all coming along, and very much appreciate your presentation today, Di. It has been fantastic, really illuminating, cleared up a lot of questions, I think, for a lot of people. So everybody keep an eye on the G2Z social media and the e-news for the next webinar session. We hope to see you there. Thanks so much for coming along today, and take care. Talk soon. Bye.
Thanks, Nell. Yeah.